you so much for being here. Really appreciated it. If you could, those of you who have already signed in, please come in and find a seat. I see lots of empty seats, but we want to get rolling here so that we give everybody here that wants to ask questions time for it. So I want to start by turning it over to Jennifer from the Coalition to Protect Frederick County.
Thank you. And I hear we still have a line all the way out, so we're going to go ahead and get started. But we just wanted to thank everybody for coming out tonight. Thank you so much for being here at Trumpet Vine Farm. On behalf of the Frederick County Coalition, Ashley, Darla, Aaron, Holly, Samantha, and myself, we are incredibly grateful that you guys took time out of your family night, work night, school night to come out here and to support our community. We want to give a special thanks to Grand Rentals in Winchester. They donated this amazing tent and the services. All the chairs, the stage, everything. So if you guys have events, parties, weddings, definitely pay back the vendors who support your community. Also, Brian Pangle, who donated the sound equipment here tonight. We have been working with Jessica and Alex from Protect Frederick and thank them for their partnership and support. And finally, just Trumpet Vine Farm for opening their doors and hosting us tonight. We also had LaBerge Inn, who provided a room for two of our speakers who flew in tonight, and Italian Touch, who provided the meal for them here tonight as well. A little bit about Trumpet Vine, if you don't know. Trumpet Vine represents exactly what so many of us are working hard to protect. Local agriculture, a family legacy, and the heart of our rural community. The owner, DeMarchi Spears, was required to sign an NDA just to understand what was being planned around his property, only to learn that the data centers would surround his property on three sides. Right behind you, that tree line where your cars are parked, it would have been there. Right back there, and then you can see a white picket fence on the other side. It would have taken all three sides and enclosed him in. Faced with the reality of losing the value of his land and his livelihood, they tried to pressure him into selling. He has worked 30 years to build his home and his farm here, and he's already experienced loss of business just as couples hesitate booking weddings out of uncertainty. This isn't just happening here, this is happening to farmers and families across the country. So I personally thank you guys for coming out tonight. We gotta support each other. I'm gonna turn it over to Sam, she's gonna finish, and we'll get started.
Wow, you guys showed up. Thank you all. I wanna echo Jennifer's sentiments there. You guys could have been at home with your children, eating dinner, relaxing, but you came here and you chose to show up instead, and that's what makes Frederick County truly special. So yeah. Quick note, this event is being recorded, live streamed, and will be available for playback so others can stay informed. I know that we have several representatives here, as well as county officials and board of supervisors. Can I ask that each of you stand, please? On behalf of the residents of Frederick County, we want to sincerely thank you. We truly appreciate and value that you're here and that you're being part of the conversation. It's a huge deal to us, so thank you all. We also want to extend a special thank you to our speakers tonight. Two have traveled from out of state and have done so without charging a speaking fee. They have no stake in Frederick County, yet chose to be here because they care about communities like ours. We will be collecting an honorarium to thank them for their time of service. If you feel led to give, there is a QR code available, as well as a donation box. Tonight, we'll hear from several speakers who will share insights and perspectives on what's happening in our community. Following that, we'll have a moderated Q&A session. We kindly ask that questions be kept to 1 minute so that we can hear from as many people as possible. We also ask that everyone remain respectful throughout the evening, regardless of the views of the person asking or answering questions. If you're wondering how to get involved, there are a few simple ways. Make sure you've signed the petitions. Join our email list to stay informed. And come out this Saturday to the Frederick County Homesteaders Spring Farm Hop at the Frederick County Fairgrounds. Over 70 vendors will be there, and it's an incredible way to support our local farms and small businesses. And finally, join the Coalition to Protect Frederick County, formerly the Frederick County Coalition Against Data Centers. Join us in our commitment to preserve and protect our valley for future generations. Now I'd like to introduce and thank the MC for the evening, Mr. Tony Cole, who will guide us through tonight's program and introduce our speakers.
Thank you very much, Samantha, Jennifer, to the entire team at the Coalition. I think they picked me because somebody heard me speak and said, he's loud, so he'll do it. So thank you for being here tonight. Again, fantastic opportunity for all of us to get together and really appreciate it, on this hottest day of the year so far. So, DeMarchi set up a fantastic structure here for us to have this conversation. I would caution everybody to ensure that when you walk around, look where you're stepping. There's cables up here in the front. So just want to make sure nobody's tripping over anything or knocking down the cameras that Jamie has going there. You'll find down this way, if you haven't already, there's a sign here, restrooms are down in the barn structure there. You'll find in the back of that barn. So, and there's a water up here in the container here, and I think there's another container around here somewhere that has water in it. So we don't even want anybody, getting dehydrated out here as warm as it is. So we're going to go through, I'm going to talk a little bit about the agenda here. Samantha gave the opening thanks to, those officials from the state and from our district and from our county that are here. Greatly appreciated. We do want everybody to be civil tonight. We want to have a conversation. We're going to take lots of questions from those of you in the audience tonight. And what's really important is you just think about how many of you are here. So please don't stand up and give an essay like I'm doing right now, all right? Try not to do that because we want to give everybody time to ask important questions. So we're going to jump right in now. We're going to start with, Tammy Clark and Kristen Meghan Kelly. So Tammy is an industrial hygienist and occupational environment, health and safety professional with 20 years of experience managing health, safety, and compliance programs across multiple industries, including work in regulatory and litigation settings. So if you can come up here, please, Tammy. So I'd also like to welcome Kristen Meghan Kelly. So a senior industrial hygienist and environmental specialist with 20 years of experience, consultant and nationally recognized expert featured in media and documentary work. Thank you, ladies, for being here. Greatly appreciate it. They're going to talk for a few minutes about the issues, and as we go through, once they're done, then we're going to have our next panelist I'll introduce will come up here, and she's going to give a presentation, and then we're going to take questions for these panelists. So thank you again.
Okay, well, thank you. It's great to be here in Virginia. We were noting how beautiful it is when we were driving from the airport, so we're really excited to be here to hopefully provide some good information to all of you. From a global perspective and from a more local perspective as well from our professions. So we're going to walk through this together because environmental and human impacts cannot be separated. In fact, they are the very core of our profession. It is the job of industrial hygienists to evaluate, recognize, anticipate, and correct any and all hazards, whether they be in the occupational work setting, the community, the public at large, or in an environmental setting. It's just our job to anticipate those things, recognize them, and then help to correct them. Okay, so that's why you can't separate the human and the environmental impacts, especially when it comes to large scale, well, or even small scale facilities like data centers. We actually started this fighting battery storage facility that China came into Michigan to try to build, and we fought that on the basis of some of the very things that we're saying here now, and we won, and we chased China out of Michigan.
here we go. I have a naturally loud voice anyway. So, yeah, I'm Kristen Meghan. Yes, I have 2 first names. I've actually been doing this for almost 25 years. And what Tammy said is, first of all, it's definitely a God thing that we met. Yeah. Because we both work for ourselves, we can't be fired, and all the complaints go to our own HR. But basically what we want to explain to you is, like Tammy said, the importance of understanding everything that is happening here and everything we're going to talk about. All the science that is based on this exposure data is based on an industrial setting, and we're throwing an industrial setting and exposures into a residential setting. So we're basically going to talk about industrial versus residential, and then we're going to talk about continuous versus intermittent exposure. And just to kind of further, my background is occupational environmental toxicology. I did this job in the Air Force, so I have seen about every single type of industry and human health hazard in my 43 years. So I kind of bring a more diverse military background to this also.
So I want to just touch on quickly, this is something that affects our daily lives. This is not just another commercial or industrial building that somebody wants to build. This is actually an issue. We got pulled into this around Christmas time when we were made aware of the issues happening in Michigan, because Michigan is, the Great Lakes state, and basically there's a data center rush to Michigan. And when we started hearing about this, and I started hearing about the environmental impacts, I started hearing about studying it, realizing there's very serious negative human impacts as well. That's when I got involved, and I just said, whoa, and I called Kristen and I said, I think this is something we need to speak on, because if people in our professions don't, who's going to? You are hearing very misleading and false, and I will tell you flat out deceptive information from those executives that represent data centers, from lobbyists that are targeting your legislators. We know, because we've been in Michigan, dealing with this in Michigan, and just testified in the Michigan legislature to provide the oversight committee with the facts about some of this. So I just want to say this is something that very seriously affects our daily lives because of the negative human and environmental impacts of these centers. Now we know, we've had them around for a few years now, we know, we have the data, we have the evidence that they are negatively affecting us. So how? These are real world examples creating real world impacts. Okay, this is not hypothetical, it's already happening. Wells are running dry in areas where data centers have been established. People are losing water pressure. Water is being contaminated. Windows are rattling from vibration. I mean, we even have videos from people standing outside the perimeter fence, several feet outside of the property even, with just a phone camera, and you can hear the noise. And Kristen's going to touch on that in a minute. To the point that drywall is cracking, there is structural stress, windows are cracking from nonstop, continuous 24/7 vibration, not just noise. Noise is another issue, but Kristen's going to touch on that in a minute. The low frequency hum, that is a constant. Okay, that's very dangerous to human health and to livestock. It's also very dangerous to our pollinators. It's become a real problem in some of the Midwest states. We'll get into that in just a little bit as well. People are relocating within their homes to sleep. People are reporting having to go down in their basements just to sleep because they can't sleep. There is a sleep issue, a sleep disruption cycle that happens with noise, frequency, and vibration. Even if it's not noise you can hear, it's a vibration and a frequency issue that, again, Kristen will explain. The loss of outdoor enjoyment. How many of you in your neighborhood or these beautiful rural communities like this farm want a giant data center right there? Seriously? This is a beautiful community. The loss of outdoor enjoyment is because of the loss of the character of your town, your neighborhood. That's gone. When you get something that should be in a heavy industrial zoned area, plopped down in an agricultural area or in a residential area. Community complaints are increasing over time. Property values are plummeting. I even researched an entire community that had to relocate. Most of these people walked away from their homes because they couldn't sell them. So what do you do with your beautiful home? You can't sell it, but you can't live there anymore because you can't sleep. And you have lost your quality of life. People are walking away from their homes giving them back to the bank. These are real issues. All right, I'm going to pass it over to Kristen now to talk about some of the human health issues like tonal noise, frequency, and vibration that are not being studied in the correct manner. This is science that's being misapplied.
Absolutely. So for those of you who've ever worked in like industrial settings, I'm sure you're familiar with certain levels of hazardous noise that requires that you wear plugs or muffs. So there's action levels when we talk about hazardous noise. And when you learn about hazardous noise, when you're talking about a lawnmower or a jet flying by, that is considered a measurement. It's called the decibels A-weighted average. So that's the average like wavelength. Oh, sorry, this one's, okay. The wavelength is more receptive to an everyday person. And then when we're talking about different types of noise, there's a C-weighted average and then a Z-weighted average. So why is that important to you? Because when we're talking about tonal noise, hazardous noise is unwanted sound. But you do not need hazardous noise to have human impacts, physiological and biological impacts. And what is so frustrating about that is most townships and cities have noise ordinances, but nobody addresses the biological impact of tonal noise because it's becoming a new thing. And that's why when you have zoning, which we'll dive into later, these things are supposed to be considered. But when we're talking about tonal noise, an 8-hour workday is what all of this exposure data is tied to. 24-hour, 7 days a week, 365 exposure, there's no data for that when we're talking about tonal noise. And tonal noise is low-level noise that has a very longer wavelength, and it goes a lot further. So if you think, like if I had a phone and I covered the volume playing music, I could stop it. It's not stopped by physical barrier like you would think. Tonal noise actually reverbs and goes right around, and it bends around structures and homes and home foundations. So when you're thinking about this noise and they tell you it's just a hum, we had someone they're trying to put in a solar farm in my area, good luck. And they tried to say, well, it's only 55 decibels beyond the fence. And that told me that they have no idea what tonal noise is. I'm going to dive into the vulnerable populations later, but what you have to understand is when we talk about a cumulative effect or synergistic impacts, that is when you have multiple sources that attack the same body systems or organs. So as I was driving in here, I saw like a whole bunch of electrical utility work. I used to work for a large electrical utility company doing my job. So I understand the electromagnetic issues that come from these substations. And when you're talking about these data centers, you have step up and step down substations. So you can have tonal noise from both of the substations and the data center itself. So the footprint of exposure is way larger than they're anticipating. Now with that EMF comes the vibration, and that vibration, like I said, it's reverbing off of the buildings, and we're going to dive deep into the health exposures, but the one thing I want to explain to you that should raise your eyebrows is when things like this are done, you're supposed to have environmental impact studies. They don't even know how to do these because they put the cart before the horse, and they've rushed all this around the country, actually around the globe. The issue is, though, we have existing data centers that we're able to extract the exposure data from, and it is very, very bad. And one thing I want to add when it comes to this tonal noise and the vibration at night, when you hear Tammy talk about sleep disturbances, this type of noise, when it is colder at night and the cold air is below the warm air, you have something called temperature inversion. And you have to basically pretend that there's a roof, and it's bouncing off the roof, and it's almost like reactivating itself, almost like an echo. So that's why it's worse at night. Another issue that we'll dive into is how it molds into, when I tell you the human impacts, I think some of your jaws will drop, but it's not just the human environment impacts, it's the human environmental impacts that involves contaminating and removing your water sources, which Tammy will dive into.
So let's talk water. This is the big one, right? There's a lot of things that our elected representatives from your local county boards, whether it's a township or county board or even your state reps, are not being told, and they're being flat out lied to. They're being told, oh, don't worry, we are not going to take any more water than a swimming pool uses because we have a closed loop system. Okay, let me just tell you right now, if you're using water in any capacity, there is no such thing as a closed loop system. The only way you would have a closed loop system, I mean, and they'll tell you, they will say that, and when I ask them these questions, they don't come back with a whole lot. But when they're using a closed loop system, what that refers to is alternative cooling systems, not water systems. But they are supposed to, like Kristen said, do an environmental impact study. You know that's the law. They're supposed to be doing environmental impact studies, EPA, and they're supposed to be providing water studies. They're not going to, because if they provide you accurate information based on the existing data centers, it would never get approved. So that's a problem. So a lot of these things are getting rushed through. Nobody is holding them accountable for not doing the environmental impact studies. In fact, this is one of the ways that we stopped the Goshen battery plant issue up in Big Rapids, Michigan, that some of you may have heard about because it was all over the news, national news, was we called on stage for the resignation, or actually the recall, which we did successfully, of all those board members that went ahead and approved this, when the whole community was saying, no, we don't want this. There was a coalition of people that organized, just like what you guys are doing right here. The community did not want this. The board members were not listening. They didn't care. They were acting on NDAs and backroom deals for self-interest and their own profit. And when we exposed all of that, and we could use the facts that they were breaking the law and they were not following proper EPA regulations and requirements, state of Michigan requirements, it was a nightmare for these board members, and they all got recalled. So I'm just putting it out there. Now everywhere we go in communities across the country and in our state and across the country, I let them know, you had better be listening to your constituents and the experts who know the compliance regulations, who know the environmental and human health aspects. We are exposing this. These are the facts. And if you're not going to listen, you better be a little bit nervous because you sit in the people's seat. You are their elected representative. And if you are not listening to your constituents, you are very vulnerable come next election, or maybe during a special election, a referendum and a recall. Just saying, been there, done that. All right, so let's talk about water. I had to throw that in there because, you know, I love our good representatives who are working really hard to listen to their constituents, but the reason that this has happened across this country is because of those who have acted with self-interest, no transparency, and are keeping their constituents in the dark, which is so wrong, okay? But anyway, when it comes to water, cooling systems require continuous water use in the way that most of these data centers are being proposed, okay? And they're doing it that way because it's easier and it's cheaper. They're not relying on alternative cooling methods for the most part. No, some are in the United States that are built on alternative cooling systems and they're not relying on water. But usually where we find that is in Europe, and they're much smaller scale. They're relying on geothermal cooled. They are relying on dielectric systems. Even with crypto mining facilities that kind of do the same thing as data centers do, they create a lot of heat, generate a lot of heat and energy. They are using such alternative and interesting fuel sources, or I should say power sources. They're underground basically, most of them are alternative cooled or underground. And they're taking the heat produced and turning it back into energy that they're using to fuel the system. So there are things they can do, but they're not doing them because water is easy. When you can just plunk a data center down on a farm that's close to a community, you can tie into existing utilities. You don't have to retrofit or update utilities from an outdated area like a brownfield or something like that, where they would be much better suited away from people. So a lot of the problems that we have seen, and I don't know this about Virginia, so take this with a grain of salt, but a lot of the problems that we have seen is the state legislators have made it very easy for these multi-billion-dollar companies to come in and to cite just by changing the zoning locations or ordinances. That's all you gotta do. And then they plunk a hyperscale industrial facility in a neighborhood, a residential area, or on agriculture land, because they've made it easy for them by corporate tax subsidies and corporate welfare. So that's why they come in, because they have all kinds of tax breaks, they have all kinds of incentives. But remember, we have to keep in mind, these are multi-billion-dollar companies. They don't need corporate welfare and tax breaks. They should be cited properly in areas that, number one, they're not tapping into our water for cooling. They can use alternative cooling systems. Number two, they are not going to be creating a negative human and environmental exposure like they would built right next door here. Okay, so siting is everything. And the requirements on them are everything, contractually. And we'll talk about that at the end when we get to solutions. But the water usage is massive. One hyperscale data center can use as much as 5 million gallons of water a day. You already have very fragile aquifers here. You already have wells that are drying up here. We did look into that. And our geologist friend is going to expound on that a little bit more after us. But you already have requirements in place for the use of your water because your water's already at risk here. Okay, so that's a problem. You should never be allowing data centers to come in here and be using systems that are going to be cooled by your water, with the aquifers, the rivers, whatever. And don't listen to them. If they say, oh, this is a closed loop system, ask them, is it using glycol plus water? Because if they say it's a glycol system, glycol is used with water. Okay, so unless it's a completely different alternative cooling system, or they're going to build it underground or put it in space, we're going to talk about that in a minute too, it's using your water. It's using way too much water, and they should never have that kind of access. So the water is lost through water withdrawal, as I said, 1 to 5 million gallons per day. Evaporative losses, there's massive water loss through evaporation, even with the water glycol systems. The blowdown discharge, where does this water go once it's been cycled? It gets blown down, and it's got to go through a drain, but not all of it goes through a drain. By the way, this is another way you can stop this. Your county drain commissioner. We just had success in Michigan with our county drain commissioner talking to one of these large hyperscale facilities and said, this has to be disposed of through the drain system. So show me, I need you to prove to me that the water that's being dumped into the drain is not contaminated. They couldn't prove that. Because here's what happens. The water that passes through these cooling systems picks up anti-corrosives, anti-scaling agents, biocides. It is contaminated. And people will argue, well, Tammy, there's all these purity and purification systems they have to go through. And I'm like, yeah, are they doing it? No. Are they doing environmental impact studies? No. Are they doing water studies? No. Who's making them do it? Right now, Elon Musk and his company is being sued because they set up a station in Mississippi, and it's gas turbines, gas-powered turbines. What they're supposed to be doing isn't happening. And it's basically polluting and contaminating all the residents, the areas, the neighborhoods around. So just because they're supposed to do something doesn't mean they're doing it. And our government, our agencies have been looking the other way for a long time. We know because we are regulatory compliance experts, and we have been working with the EPA in East Palestine, Ohio. We were called to testify in that lawsuit against them because they did exactly the opposite of what they should have done, putting that entire community at risk. So don't tell me, oh, this water is being purified before it gets dumped. You need to verify that. I need water tests. You need to tell me for sure. Don't just tell me, because this is what's happening. They're all out there doing this, just trying to sell this contract. And we're going to talk about what's really going on. This is not need-driven. It is contract-driven. Kristen's going to talk about that in a minute. So the local water stress potential is very serious, and you already have that happening here. There is no way your local aquifers can handle a data center coming in here. All right, and then quickly I just want to touch on some land use and soil issues, because this is an industrial land conversion, and it changes the land permanently. Something that should be built on a brownfield or way away from people and neighborhoods, communities, is being built right next door to people, schools, even farms where livestock is affected, because they're just rushing through ordinances or zoning changes just to allow a data center to come in. Well, what's the rush here? We're going to talk about that in just a minute. But the problem is, you take a farm and then you introduce the compaction, that soil compaction, and you forever affect and change the soil structure so it's not able to get good oxygen uptake, nutrient uptake. the roots cannot penetrate, and then you have drainage issues because now you have compaction in areas where there was no compaction before. This is going to negatively affect all the farmland, all the lands all around where a data center is implemented because of runoff and things like that. So these are challenges that are very serious and are very real that you are not being given all the facts about. So that's why we're here.
So if you want to look into who might be trying to put in a data center that you haven't heard of, the first thing you want to do is look up who is filing for air permits for diesel generators. That's literally the first thing they do because they want to see if they can even get them granted. Because in different sections, every state is different, but different sections allow so much. It's called PM 2.5. It's particulate matter that's 2.5 equal to or less than microns. Think 30 times smaller than a human hair. And these are particulate matter that can basically get into the deep lung, and it bypasses all your natural defenses like the hair in your nose and things like that. So look at those emissions, because when you think of diesel generators, they actually are tested very frequently, and they'll have so many that it's not negligible. And when we're talking about the diesel air permits, the discharge, the emissions from it, this happened with the wildfires. I was trying to educate the world on this. Nobody was talking about this. There's something that happens with PM 2.5 particulates. It's called SOA. So it's secondary organic aerosols, and it's when you have this matter get exposed to sunlight, it creates new hazards. So it's basically like, think about being exposed to a chemical and you think it dissipates, and then when it hits its sun, it comes right back and hits you again. So this isn't just a one-time exposure. It can actually hang around and just keep igniting itself. So when we're talking about the human health issues, when I tell you that we have data in an occupational setting for 8 hours, my job is not to scare you. I'm never going to lie to you, and I am not the type of person that over-exaggerates for a talking point. Actually, my job is the opposite, because now in the world of Google, people freak out and I explain there's controls in place, you're fine. But, like Tammy said, we worked in East Palestine, Ohio, and in this profession, unless we have data to disprove an exposure, we always must assume that it is a worst case scenario. So when they told those people it was safe, it wasn't. They didn't air sample. They actually were air sampling incorrectly. So when we're talking about a 24-hour continuous exposure to the particulate matter, think of that synergistic exposure I talked about. The tonal noise, the vibration. What this does to the human body, there are certain vulnerable populations, pregnant women, elderly, the chronically ill, and children. With pregnant women, the continuous exposure to tonal noise can raise their blood pressure, it can increase cortisol, and it absolutely can increase maternal fetal heart rate. That is meaning the mother and the fetus have an increased fetal heart rate. And the overexposure to PM 2.5 can also cause low birth rate. Now with children are forever growing and their brain develops in stages. And when you are bringing in tonal noise, think of we've all heard of the fight or flight response. When you are exposed to this, although you may not hear it, at night you'll feel it and your brain is still responding to it. Kind of like radiation, just because you can't see it or hear it doesn't mean it's not affecting you. What this does to children is it impedes their frontal lobe development. It slows their brain development, their reading comprehension, irritability, mix that with a lack of sleep, the behavioral problems. That is probably the most vulnerable population is children. With the chronically ill, there are already people who are living with a heightened autonomic nervous system, and that autonomic nervous system is just constantly reacting. Even though you feel calm, your brain and your physiological response is putting stress on your organs. That constant stress exposure increases cortisol. High cortisol can lead to other issues, and this impacts cardiovascular health. These are long-term stress responses that have no data behind them. So I have to go off the 8-hour data. Now, think about this, 24 hours a day. That's why I'm trying to tell you. I'm not just sitting here trying to scare you. I'm trying to tell you, nobody can refute to you what I am saying. I've done hazardous noise exposure for over 200,000 people. And this is absolutely not okay, because this also impacts mental health. When I worked for an electrical utility company, the chronic exposure to EMF was leading to increased suicide. Your livestock will bang their heads against fences. They will not feed. If they're not feeding, they're not producing the meat or the milk. This has economic impacts in the farming field. And the one thing I want to explain about this exposure data is that it's all based off the 95th percentile. Some of you might know what I'm talking about, but the 95th percentile is taking the average healthy adult. It does not include children, those who are immunocompromised, elderly, going through cancer or treatment. It does not include that. It doesn't include anyone outside, like a 5'8" person who weighs 160 pounds. That's like the 95th percentile. So I was trying to think of a way to explain it, and you don't need extreme exposures to affect a developing brain. You just need constant exposures at the wrong time. So these issues, when we rate hazards, this is not a negligible hazard. You are going to see a decline in the return from livestock. You are going to see miscarriages. You are going to see early births. These are very real things, and that's why, even with 5G telephone poles that were going up, there are rules for how far they can be from farms and schools. So while some of you may be done, having children, you don't know who's going to inherit your home and move into. This harms a community, and it also puts a heavy load on your health hospital systems. Because this is a type of exposure that people tend to just, it's just an ache, it's just a barometric pressure headache. It does not take a lot of exposure to start to feel the impacts of tonal noise. This is also considered a form of military torture, tonal noise. So this is why I'm very passionate about it, and it blows my mind because we work in a public health profession. Where are your public health officials? They sure told you to go do all the things for COVID, and they tell you to do all the things for your children. They tell you all these things that you should do to protect your neighbor. Where are they protecting you? They have a duty to protect all of you, regardless of your age, religion, and political leanings. You need to actually go to however your counties are set up, you need to call upon your health officer and ask them where they are.
Yeah, we get a little spicy because we can. We're our own bosses. All right, we got to wrap this up here. So the last couple things I want to talk about are the projects that are being presented to you as demand-driven. They're not. We're fine. We don't need all these data centers. Do you know where this is really being driven from? Their own contracts. They have contract requirements that they must meet for a certain number of buildings or outputs, computational data, pre-negotiated capacity agreements, infrastructures being put ahead of need. Economic incentives are driving siting. This is not because we need more support for AI. It's really not. But you know what? Their contracts are not our problem. I don't really care if you have a contract that you're going to default on because I won't let you build here. Not my problem. Take it somewhere else. So what we need to do as we look into wrapping this up with solutions is we need to be putting moratoriums in place to just slow our roll. What is the hurry? What is the rush? Why is this being done at warp speed and in the irresponsible manner in which this is being done? It's to satisfy their contracts. Make no mistake about that. Okay, so what we found is as we have put moratoriums in, we've worked with counties all across Michigan and other areas, we put these moratoriums in place. What happens is that gives us time to put together a panel of experts, people like us, who can help the local communities to work through these issues, find proper siting locations, deal with the ordinances, deal with the change of zoning, things like that. What would be maybe a better solution? As we put that together, what we find is because they are under a time crunch to meet the demands for their contracts, they go somewhere else. So that's how, another way you can put this to bed, is through your local counties or townships. Just put a moratorium on it for a year. That's what we're looking at in Michigan right now. Proposed legislation to put a 1-year moratorium on all new data center construction until 2027. So you know what's going to happen? They're going to go find somewhere else where they can build fast and get their contract requirements met. That's what this is really all about. So the solutions are the moratorium that I talked about, creating an advisory board to help educate your local officials, looking at proper siting, And here's the big one. If they do come in, you require them to, through contract language, be responsible for their own source of energy. They should never be dumping into our grids, our electrical grids, that cannot possibly handle that load and are gonna cause your utility rates to spike. This is what's happening everywhere. Utility rates are just through the roof because of these companies. Require them to use alternative cooling systems, never allow them to tap into your water. If you want to come here, if we approve something, okay, we've met all these requirements. You cannot use our water. You have to use something else, an alternative cooling system. Bury it underground, put it in outer space. There's a race on right now to get these things in outer space, and by the time a lot of these current campuses are built that are being under construction, they're going to vacate this campus and they're going to utilize the new technology and they're going into outer space. So I'm telling you, there's no rush here. We need to slow this down. All right. So we need to close this out. I'm going to let Kristen have the last word because it looks like we're out of time here, but it's been great being with all of you. We will take some questions as well, so we'll stick around.
We had our little timer up here. Basically, just to remind you, and I do have a couple of bullet points, just to remind you of why you need to fight this. Because we are not against AI. I'm not against data centers. We're against where they're putting them and the way that they're putting them in and using outdated technology. So this is not a lack of science problem. This is a misapplication of science. So remember, they're using occupational standards for residential life. They're ignoring continuous exposures. There's no cumulative impact modeling, no accounting for vulnerable groups that I mentioned. They assume short-term exposure, and it all lacks real-world evaluations. There's no science if they tell you there's nothing to worry about, it's safe. They're lying to you, and they're gaslighting you. Thank you.
So, great discussion, ladies. Thank you so much. Very, very interesting. So we're going to take just a few questions for them, and we're going to have more questions later. So, and I see this gentleman's hand go up first, so I'm going to come right back to you, sir.
I can talk.
Okay.
Quick question. I heard Michigan brought up many times. Just for the record, is Michigan a Dillon rule state as Virginia is?
I'm not familiar with
A what rule?
Dillon rule state. So
I have not ever heard that, and we're very involved with the legislature there, so I don't know the answer to that. I've never heard that.
okay.
So,
Real quick,
not sure.
Dillon rule means we have to ask for the state legislature to build the laws that we can adopt at the county level.
Oh no, I would say absolutely not. Michigan's very tyrannical when it comes to that.
Another one right here.
Hi, thank you. I'm Lisa Frank. Some of you may know me, but I own the thoroughbred breeding farm across the street here from a proposed data center. So the Virginia thoroughbred industry brings in about 86 point some odd million dollars a year. My question, overall the equine industry in Virginia is about $2 billion of revenue across the state. So my question is, when we're looking at a data center that is potentially across the street from an operational breeding farm for the thoroughbred horses, what kind of impacts am I looking at? As well as from, like, I have mares, I have 4 of the 10 stallions in Virginia that are standing in Virginia from the Virginia certified folks there. So I'm a little worried about the impacts to the farm, the impacts to my clients that come in, as well as you also mentioned that there is livestock, there's like a farming like setback or something like that. What is that setback? Thank you.
So unfortunately, it does put these horses at risk. Although human health exposures differ from animals, the impacts are the same. Dose doesn't mean it's the same. This tonal noise has the cardiovascular system and brain activity stay on constant alert. And if anyone has gone through anything health-wise, bereavement, you name it, they say rest. How important is rest? This is going to disturb, especially if you're breeding. This truly will impact their, I don't know how you say it for horses, their desire to procreate. This will impact their libido, so to speak. It will. Tonal noise. I used to work at a VA hospital, and across from me, UIC had animals and primates and things. They use tonal noise to actually study the psychological impacts, like I said, self-harm. So they will probably even reject feeding their young. They will be so irritable from this tonal noise because it is 24/7, and even if they're not hearing it, like I said, it's an autonomic nervous system response. And I said that affects livestock because for people who are profiting off of, the meat or the dairy, this can impact their feed, which does not create good cattle for slaughter, and it affects the milk production. And again, the same thing, maternal fetal weight. It'll impact the pregnancy of the horses. Sorry, I don't really know veterinary terms, but
That's okay. So what you're saying is the Virginia industry, certified thoroughbred industry, is at risk if a data center goes in across the street from the number 2 operating facility in the state.
Absolutely. Absolutely. It's a huge risk.
I'm Joe Crane. I'm Planning Commissioner for Gainesboro. Either by luck or divine appointment, today I bumped into water management and wastewater management folks from Fairfax. And I asked them, I said, so what do you think about data centers? They said the wastewater management was the largest consumer of electricity until the data centers came in, and they've quadrupled that usage, which has raised the rates for residents exponentially. Secondly, they said contaminated water goes into the wastewater management system from the data centers. So let's not Fairfax Frederick.
Thank you for being here, and that is something that we always address because our wastewater treatment facilities are really good at filtering out like the pathogen, the biologics, but they are not set up, they cannot handle, they don't have the filtering media to filter out the biocides and the anti-scaling agents and the corrosives that are being dumped down through the blowdown. So that's a real serious problem too.
So thank you, ladies, very much. Fascinating discussion. And I just want to point out to everybody in here, I know there were a lot of questions you have. We're going to have plenty of time for questions later for the entire panel. And then we're going to have a whole session on Q&A. And then when we're all done, then we're going to have informal conversations with all our panelists as well. So you're going to have lots of opportunity to ask those questions. So, and some great questions. So I'd like to introduce Martha Sadlick. She's a geologist with James Madison University, so right here in the valley. So she's got 45 years of experience as a senior geophysicist, geologist, including work with Shell, Total, Conoco, and her career is focused on geologic and geophysical analysis for exploration and development projects across the North Sea, the Philippines, Gulf America, Pennsylvania, and many other places. But most importantly, I think related to that though, she was raised on a family farm near Strasburg, Virginia. So she brings deep knowledge of the Shenandoah Valley.
Hi, welcome everybody. I'm going to keep this sort of simple, but it's the critical information that you need to have. So I'm basically going to talk about our current drought conditions. I don't know if you guys kept track of that. I've got links to the USGS data points where we have wells that they track. I'm also going to tell you about where your water comes from and how it's collected. And then I'm going to go through the underlying geology which impacts the water. Next slide, please. So this is the current U.S. drought map. As you can see, it was released April 9th. And all the areas in orange, deep red, are in drought. And you hit one more time, please. This is focused on Virginia. The same map blown up in Virginia, and the circle area is our county, which sort of has us in a moderate drought, and the dark orange is a more severe drought. So we're not far from being in a more severe drought. Next slide. This is the captured yesterday from the USGS National Water Dashboard. And the link is there if you guys would ever want to look at, keep a track of it yourself. But if you notice, the circle areas is our surrounding areas. Warren County, it's, I think Winchester is in the center there. And what I'm trying to show in the circle over there is that the orange and the dark red are in, I don't know if you guys know what a normal bell curve is. We are in 10% or less on the bell curve. That's how low our water is. We are not in the medium, we're not even close to the medium range. And this one dark red, bright red one, that is, it's off the bell curve on statistics on being low. So we are currently, you can see it's regionally. There's only one green dot over closer to DC, but regionally we are very, very dry. And this has an impact on your groundwater levels and your runoff. Next slide, please. So I had to do a lot of digging around on the USGS site. I've contacted the Virginia Geological Survey. I've contacted James Madison University professors to get us some assistance. And this is from a 2005 water study, and it was the last time that the USGS looked at Frederick County. And there's a 2010 report that is also very, very good on the USGS did on Warren County, and it also shows very similar things. But this is one site in Clark County, Brandy Farm, which is not far from Frederick County. And what it's basically doing a historical. This is actually your water curve, and what it's showing is the average, the low, and the high. But what you can see is that during non-drought periods, the groundwater levels is about 25 feet. When you get down into the drought periods, you drop your groundwater level over 20 feet. So the groundwater level is 20 feet lower, and I have heard people, I talked to a driller getting a well drilled on the farm, and he said he had somebody that he drilled not far from Brandy Farm, he drilled a well for. The water was at 65 foot, and then when they went to put the well pump in, it was down at 120. It had dropped 60 feet. So that's a huge groundwater level drop. Next slide. So where do you get your water from? So basically, you have a lot of water wells. I couldn't get hold of a decent well database. The county doesn't really make that available. But from the report, you're going to be getting your water for residential wells. It's going to be, you're going to drill a well that's maybe down to 300 feet, maybe down to 600 feet, depending on where you are. But you're going to be dependent upon faults, fractures, and bedding planes, because the rock that you have has no porosity and permeability. And I'll go on the next slide, we'll show that better. The average water rate, according to some information I found on the web, is probably 3 to 5 gallons per hour for the average well in the county. There are some exceptions. I was looking at the USGS report that was 2005. They had some 1,000-gallon an hour wells, but those were exceptions. Those were drilled along. They were down to 900 feet. They had drilled along a strike-slip fault where you have more option. You have more processing permeability along the strike-slip fault. The other place that you get your water from are vacated quarries. And so basically what happens is the runoff runs into the quarries. And that we need to have more of those, because the problem, I'll explain that later. So you've got a Stevens City quarry reservoir, and then you have a Clearbrook quarry reservoir that they have water treatment plants associated. The biggest one that I know of where you get your water from in the county and in the city is the Percy D. Miller Water Treatment Plant. It's in Warren County, and matter of fact, that picture over there is a picture of the water intake dam. It's on my farm. It's across the water from me. The water comes from the North Fork of the Shenandoah River. It has the ability to do a 10 million gallon a day intake, but the water intake is going to be limited, restricted when we're in a drought. The other thing is, the reason why I'm mentioning this is from what I understand, one of the data rooms want to take water from here and then have it go export it, out in Clark County, is what I've heard about. I'm not 100% certain. And then you also have a lot of draw on the North Fork. There's upstream towns, Strasburg. You've got all the towns upstream that take water from the North Fork. Now, in 2024, the City of Winchester proposed capital improvements to address reservoir initiative. Funds for this reservoir and upgrades to the Shenandoah River water intake and treatment plant are $75 million. I'm like, what are they spending money on? I know they need to fix my side, but that's a lot of money to be spending. Next slide. So here we're getting into the rocks, the fun bit. This is my favorite bit, right? So if you were looking for an ideal aquifer, you'd have these sand grains with space in between with the blue bit is your water, right? And water flows through it. And we don't have that. We have rocks that are anywhere from 500 to 200 million years old that have been through 3 mountain buildings. And the type of rock that they are mostly the limestone, Martinsburg shale and the Beekman limestones and the different limestones that you have that are all very fine grained micrites, and they don't have any porosity in it. This is solid. There's no water in the rock. The only way that you get water in the rock is that you have a diagram up there of fractures and faults and caves and bedding planes. So when we have the contact between different beds, there's usually a place that water can creep through. So I call this a tight, diffuse aquifer because it doesn't hold any volume. And when the rain comes in, it has to filter into these cracks. So it has no porosity, no permeability. And I have the local sedimentary column over here, which is, you can see, well, it's hard to see because it's kind of blurry on this, but you're basically going from Cambrian to Ordovician up there. And like I said, it's very old, tight rock. The water volume is confined to the joints and fractures and faults in the bedding planes and the caves. The springs are associated with larger thrust faults or strike slip faults. Water retention is poor. You have very strong clay soil here, as you all well know. The limestone makes a kind of a red-orange clay, and the Martinsburg shale makes a kind of a yellow clay soil. And these aquifers are recharged by precipitation and discharged into streams. So it's going to soak in a little, but it's going to run off. And that's the reason why having these quarries to collect your water are important. Covering the land with extensive development limits recharge. Right? You cover it with cement and pavement, you're not going to be feeding the aquifer. Next slide. So this is from the 2005 report. It's a limited cross-section across the county. It's through this bit right here is that cross-section up there. And what I really want to show you here is they consider most of the water comes out of the limestone. That's 25% of the county. And of course, Winchester is like right up in here, so we know how much of the limestone is being covered right now by Winchester. And so, yeah, the carbonate aquifer basically is supposed to have the rain come from here, fill into the aquifer, which is low, and then you're going to be damming against the Martinsburg shale, which represents there. So what you see here is that in this cross-section, these beds are standing straight up, right? When you get into the limestone section, you've got what's called a syncline. It bends down, and then you arc up, that's an anticline, and then you run against the Martinsburg shale, which is all vertical. So the little blue arrows represent the kind of recharge that you can see that they've put into this report. And it doesn't go very deep because the rock's tight. And you're going to have limited spaces. The other thing that you have to think about here is pressure, how you're going to get water flowing through this. And so basically, I wanted to say, you've got tight rock, you've got fractures, you've got limited places to put the water, and it's not really a place to be putting a data center. You haven't got the water. And that's the end of my conclusion.
So are there any questions for Martha? We're going to take just a couple before we move on to Nathan. I see one right here. Hold on one sec, sir, if you don't mind.
Hello, thank you. So given this geology, what are the chances, one, that they can even get what they need where they build? And if they do, from how large of an area will they impact the water supply?
I think, well, like one of the best wells in the county was drilled to 900 feet and it made 1,000 gallons an hour. That's 12,000, that's 24,000 a day. If they need billions a day, you're not going to be making it. It just isn't going to happen. The only place to get it is out of the river. And when we're in a drought, the government controls on how much water you can get out of the river. That's going to be the only way.
And so for how wide of an area would they, if they draw water? So how large of an impact area would they have if they're pulling water out of the ground?
I haven't got any statistical studies on it like these ladies would, but I would imagine it's going to be huge. And the other thing to remind everybody of, when you're talking about limestone, you're talking about karst topography, meaning all our interface with it. We have caves, we've got sinkholes, we have all of that stuff. You starve that stuff of water, you kill a cave. It will collapse on you, right? So, I just don't see how you can have the water. I mean, the one exceptional well that made that kind of thing was drilled on like a strike slip fault through here. And like I said, that was an exceptional circumstance. That is not an everyday well. A 3 to 5 gallon, even a 25 gallon a day well, hour well, is not going to even come close to what they need.
Thank you, Martha. Any other questions that we have? While I'm walking over to this gentleman, I'll point out today there was a great article that just came out. So about the Potomac River is now the most endangered river in the United States of America. So, and it's all around data centers.
Okay, I'm going to try to be as accurate as I can with what I got. So they're getting ready to do the turn in the application for the Virginia Technology Park just the other day. And I'm 3 miles from that, but I'm 1 mile from the quarry. So from what I gather, the quarry is going to be what feeds the Virginia Technology Park. And so when I got my well drilled, it was 540 feet, 2 gallons a minute, and that's all we could get. So what I gather is probably the water, in the aquifer is going, it's all going to the quarry. But then we'll be feeding the quarry over to the technology park, and then and it'll be feeding everybody else too. And then of what I gather, the water then will be going over to the quarry, back into the quarry, the runoff, and which will cause more dirty water and everything. And so 2 gallons a minute, that's all I can get at 540 feet. So we know we got some trouble.
Yeah, I don't know if that would feed my grandkids slip and slides. All right, well, thank you very much, Martha. Greatly appreciate it. No, we'll actually hit more questions here shortly. Thank you very much. going to do next is we're going to have Nathan Russell come to the stage. So Nathan here, I'm out of place here, is an assistant professor of economics at Patrick Henry College, so in Purcellville. So with 2 decades of experience teaching and applying economic principles, his work focuses on public choice, public finance, and the practical application of economic ideas, particularly as they relate to policy and real-world decision-making. So Nathan, really appreciate you being here, and I know you don't have a presentation, so we're going to dim these down here and just let you speak. Here's the microphone right here.
All right, well, apparently I can keep it karst, so we'll see how this goes. Yeah, so I work on the eastern side of the ridge, but my wife and I have lived here in Frederick County for just about exactly 16 years now. And over in the Greenwood area on the eastern side of the Winchester there. And you're talking about the Fredericksburg Shale, I think is what you said it was. Yeah. When we moved here, I went to plant some trees around my house, and I had to buy a pickaxe. So yeah, understand a little bit, at least what I see on the ground up around my house. Looking forward to getting questions from you guys, both now, right, as soon as I'm done, and then at the end after our last presenter gets a chance. It's been really interesting to get into local finance and local politics more the last year or so. I'm still not super comfortable with everything that Frederick County is doing, both from a knowledge perspective and just there's some stuff going on that makes me uncomfortable. So the econ side is challenging. Okay, the econ side is challenging, and some of what we've heard is really easy to grasp from a cost perspective. Healthcare costs, right? People who are exposed to the emissions, to the pollution, to the particulates from the data centers are absolutely going to face increased healthcare costs. Quantifying these healthcare costs on the bigger scope is a little bit challenging. There's actually a paper, I just forgot it over here, but it's on one of the Facebook groups. And it was released for one of the Loudoun County facilities. Just this past, well, it was released the end of February. And they found essentially that the singular facility that they were looking at was causing healthcare costs in the $50 to $100+ million range. Okay, sounds really bad, and it is. You also have to understand, though, just so you go into these discussions fully armed, that the way that they do those calculations is based on a percentage of the people around the impact. And so Loudoun County has a lot more human beings than we do. So quick, super back of the envelope, we're looking at $1 to $3 million in healthcare costs a year from each one of these things. Again, just back of the envelope, but based off of the work that was printed a month ago. Electricity bills. Electrical bills are going up at about 30% faster than the rate of inflation. There have been some spikes in Virginia as much as 270%. That's not the norm. I don't think we would see that here. But 30% faster than the rate of inflation is probably more the norm. Now, not all of that is because of data centers, but they don't help at all. Right? They consume a massive amount of electricity, put a massive amount of strain on the grid. If you guys remember, during some of the winter storms that we had, there were warnings being put out that they might have to have rolling power reductions, rolling brownouts. It's hard to get official statements to confirm this, but there's pretty strong evidence that that's because of the additional strain on the grid from these things. Okay. Now, what is the shiny prize being waved around all the time with these? Taxes. Absolutely. And there is possibly a lot there. At least if you take the numbers at face value. And again, this is back of the envelope math. Okay, so don't go to a court with this math. But no, back of the envelope math. Comparing the newly approved tax rates for Frederick County that Willie Deutsch posted on one of the Facebook groups affiliated with this event from the board discussion a week and a half ago. But looking at the current rates, the new set of rates, again, back of the envelope math, the rough conversion is that an acre of farmland creates about as much tax revenue as a single kilowatt in one of these facilities. Okay, I'll say that again. Roughly, back of the envelope math, given the rates that we have recently just approved here in Frederick, an acre of farmland is roughly tax equivalent to a kilowatt in a data center. Excuse me, I'm parched. Okay, so each rack in one of these facilities, each server rack, roughly the size of this thing, plus about 6 feet tall, is about 3 to 10 kilowatts, depending on what they put in that rack. So that's 3 to 10 acres of farmland in a footprint about yay big. That's the shiny prize. Now, is it always going to be that? No, absolutely not. Because that is based on current prices for the hardware that goes into that rack. This also doesn't account for what the state is receiving or not receiving based on tax breaks. This does account for the lower business property tax rate that these places are expected to pay in Frederick. They're a very capital dense business. It's much easier to go after a single source for your revenue and try to deal with one person, one client, one company to try to placate them and play nice with them than it is to interact with everybody here. Right? And so the board, it's just simple being human. They feel like they need revenue. It's easy to get, they think it's easy to get revenue in one spot. Okay. Like I mentioned though, GPU prices are probably going to come down. GPU prices around the world are incredibly high right now. I don't know if you guys or if you have sons or daughters who have tried to build a computer recently. GPU prices, RAM prices are exceptionally high. In some cases, 5x what they were 2 years ago. When those prices come back down and the hardware for these things gets rebought, tax revenue will fall. So I don't have even back in the envelope math there, but the tax revenue that's being waved around saying, hey look, this is what we're going to get when they go to replace these things, even if they get built. Some of our friends from before were saying, hey, by the time these things actually come to fruition, they may not even get built. But even if they get built, the tax revenue that comes right now is not going to be the same tax revenue that comes when they restock their racks. Okay. Now, can we develop other businesses? Well, of course we can. Of course we can. All of you guys are smart. All of you guys have ideas. I bet everybody in this room has 3 or 4 ideas running around in their head right now. And the thing that is keeping you from pursuing them is some combination of resources and time. Right? But you guys all have ideas. And finding ways to turn those ideas and supporting each other as we turn those ideas into businesses is one of the best ways to generate increased revenue for the county in a sustainable way. But it's a challenge. right? And so if you go in, I mean, we can go and we can talk about health. I'm not talking against that whatsoever. I'm kind of shocked by what I've heard here this evening, right? The ground, the soil. It's amazing how important the stuff that we found everything on actually is, and the way that the water runs through it. And I'm sure we're going to hear some interesting things from our fifth speaker tonight. But it's a challenge to overcome the shiny tax revenue piece. I thought I'd kind of share a little bit of back of the envelope math there about that. So again, it's about 1 acre per kilowatt hour. That's the rough back of the envelope conversion for now. After GPU prices fall, I expect it to go to about half of that. Possibly 2/3, somewhere in that range. It is very hard. One final word of warning here. It's very hard to build a community entirely funded on agritourism. We can do it. It's been done. Right? Our friends with the equestrian community have a lot going on. There's a lot going on with wine. There's a lot going on with event venues and spaces, because we have a massive population boom just to our east. Right? And as people realize and understand that